She walked slowly through the wide corridors of the alien academy, her head lowered, her steps soft. The hall was full of laughter, training sounds, and strong voices echoing from the combat fields outside. But none of that belonged to her. She always stayed in the shadows, moving like a quiet ghost. For as long as she could remember, the voices of her own people had carved wounds into her heart. Not strong enough, not fast enough, not breeding material. Those words followed her everywhere. In her society, worth was measured by strength. A female's value was judged by her ability to fight, to survive, and to pass on powerful offspring. She lacked all of it, or at least, that's what everyone said. Whenever she tried to train, her body trembled. Whenever she spoke, her voice broke. Other girls mocked her openly. Warriors laughed behind her back. She had learned to stay silent, to keep her gaze on the floor. It was easier than facing the storm of rejection. Deep inside, though, a quiet ache lived. She wanted to matter. She wanted someone to see her, not as a failure, not as a weakling, but simply as herself. But hope was dangerous here. Hope could only break her further. So she built walls, brick by brick, around her heart. One evening, while she was carrying food supplies to the training ground, she noticed something strange. A human stood among her people. His figure was smaller, his body softer compared to the towering warriors around him. Yet he did not look afraid. He watched the sparring matches with calm eyes, and sometimes he even smiled. She froze. Why was a human here? Most of her kind dismissed humans as fragile, soft creatures from a death world that somehow survived by luck. They were not respected. But this one, he stood tall, unshaken, as if he belonged. Her people only tolerated him because of the political agreement between their species. But to her surprise, no one mocked him, at least not to his face. She turned away quickly, not wanting to be seen staring. She was used to being invisible. She wanted to stay invisible. But fate had other plans. The next day, as she walked near the practice yard, she heard loud laughter. A group of young warriors were gathered, pointing at her. She will never carry the next generation, one said, smirking. Her body is too weak. Even her spirit is broken. Her chest tightened. Her hands shook as she tried to hurry past them. She hated that their words still cut deep, even though she had heard them 1,000 times before. She hated that her eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she had no strength left. She just wanted to disappear. And then his voice came. Why are you talking like that? The human had stepped closer, his tone calm but sharp. The warriors blinked at him, surprised that someone so small, so fragile, dared to interrupt. He looked at them without fear, his eyes steady. If you only measure worth by strength, he said, then you see nothing at all. The group laughed at him, tossing dismissive words before walking away. To them, a human's opinion meant little. But to her, the sound of his voice lingered. She looked at him, confused. Why would he defend her? No one ever had. Not her own kind. Not even her family. She was nothing to them. Yet, this human, a stranger, had spoken for her. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, heat rising in her chest. Her heart raced, and for the first time in years, not because of shame, but because of something else. Something new. That night, as she lay on her small bed, the words of the warriors echoed in her mind. But louder than them, another sound repeated itself, the human's voice, calm and certain. If you only measure worth by strength, then you see nothing at all. She turned to the ceiling, her thoughts tangled. Who was he to say such things? What did he see when he looked at her? She had always believed she was invisible. But maybe, just maybe, someone had finally noticed her. Her world had not changed yet. The colony still saw her as unworthy. The whispers would still follow her tomorrow. But something inside her had shifted, something small but unshakable. For the first time, She wondered if she had been wrong about herself all along. And somewhere deep inside, a spark lit, a spark that could one day become fire. Asterisk, the next morning was colder than usual. A sharp wind moved through the training grounds, carrying the metallic scent of weapons and the low rumble of drills. She walked carefully, carrying a bundle of rations, hoping to avoid the stares and whispers that usually followed her. Her plan was always the same: move quickly, stay unseen, return before anyone noticed. But fate, again, had its own plans. As she stepped into the supply area, she froze. The human was standing there, alone, studying one of the alien weapons on display. His hands hovered above the weapon, not touching, but his eyes showed deep thought. Unlike her kind, who often handled weapons with arrogance, he looked at it with curiosity, almost respect. She thought about slipping away. If he saw her, maybe he would speak to her, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. But before she could move, his head lifted. His gaze met hers, her breath caught. "Hello," he said simply. His voice was calm, low, and carried no mockery. For a moment, her mind went blank. No one ever spoke to her first. No one ever used that tone with her, gentle, as if she mattered. She hesitated, clutching the bundle against her chest, unsure whether to respond or run. "You were here yesterday," he added, breaking the silence. "When those warriors laughed at you." Her chest tightened. Shame crawled back like a shadow. She wanted to hide. But before she could, he continued, "I didn't like what they said." His words were steady, unshaken. It wasn't true, she blinked. No one had ever spoken against the whispers. Not once in her life. She opened her mouth, but her voice came out as little more than a whisper. "You don't know me." He tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I know weakness when I see it. And I know strength too. You carry yourself differently than they think. They don't see it, but I do." Her hands trembled. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something that felt almost like hope. "Why do you care?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. The human gave a small smile, not offended. "Because I know what it feels like," he said quietly. "Back on my world, humans are called fragile by species like yours. They think we don't belong. I've heard it 1,000 times. And yet, here I am, standing in front of you." She stared at him. His words pressed against the deepest part of her chest, the part she always kept hidden. For the first time, someone had put into words the pain she carried. He had felt it too. Her gaze dropped, but his next words struck harder. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. "And more beautiful than you realize." The bundle nearly slipped from her hands. The word "beautiful" rang in her ears, louder than the storm of rejection she had lived in all her life. No one had ever used that word for her. In her culture, beauty was strength, battle scars, perfect posture, a sharp gaze. She had none of that. But his voice was steady, sincere, as if he wasn't saying it out of kindness, but truth. She wanted to argue, to push his words away before they broke her further. But she couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest warm, her thoughts spinning. The human didn't press her. He only gave her one last glance and said, "Don't believe everything they tell you. Sometimes the crowd is blind." With that, he walked past her, leaving the space quiet again. She stood frozen, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wanted to move, but her body refused. The words echoed in her head again and again, "More beautiful than you realize." That night, she sat by the window of her small chamber. Stars hung across the sky, cold and distant. Yet tonight, they seemed a little closer. She thought about the human's eyes, the way his voice didn't shake, the way he said those impossible words. Why would he say that? Why would he see her differently? Her people had told her she was worthless, not breeding material, a mistake. She had believed it. She had lived inside that cage for years. But now a single human had cracked it open with nothing more than a compliment. She touched her chest lightly, as if to steady her racing heart. The whispers of rejection were still there, but they no longer sounded as strong. For the first time she wondered, what if they were wrong about me? The next day, the academy felt louder than usual. Training grounds echoed with shouts, clashing weapons, and the thrum of alien drums that marked another cycle of strength trials. For everyone else, it was normal. For her, it was a storm she wanted to avoid, but something inside her was different. Last night she barely slept. The human's words circled endlessly in her head. You're stronger than you think, and more beautiful than you realize. They weren't just words. They had pierced through the walls she had built around her heart. She told herself not to think about it. Maybe he said it out of pity. Maybe humans use strange words without meaning, yet. The tone in his voice, the calmness in his eyes, the way he spoke without hesitation, it felt real. Too real. She carried supplies again that morning, trying to keep her mind blank. But as she walked past groups of her peers, the usual whispers followed. Why is she even here? She'd never be chosen, not breeding material. The words struck like knives. They always did. But today, something strange happened. For the first time, they did not bury her completely. They still hurt, but a softer voice inside whispered louder, "Don't believe everything they tell you." And she realized that voice belonged to him. Later, near the water reservoir, she saw him again. He was sitting on a stone ledge, studying the sky, as if he were waiting for something beyond the stars. She almost turned away, but her feet didn't listen. Before she knew it, she was standing nearby, the silence stretching between them. He looked up surprised, then smiled slightly. "You came." Her throat tightened. She didn't plan to come. She didn't plan anything. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Why? Why did you say those things?" He tilted his head. "Which things?" Her cheeks grew warm. The word itself felt heavy on her tongue. "Beautiful." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his expression softened, his eyes steady. "Because it's true." Her breath hitched. No laughter, no mockery, no hesitation. Just truth. "You don't understand," she said quickly, almost angry. "In my people's eyes, beauty is battle scars, power, victory. I have none. I am a mistake to them. I am nothing." The human leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you really believe that?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to say yes. It had been her truth for so long. But the way he looked at her made the words die in her throat. He spoke again, his tone calm but sharp, like a blade of light cutting through the dark. "They want you to believe that, because it keeps you small. But you are not small. You feel, you endure. You stand even when they try to push you down. That is strength. And strength is beautiful." Her heart raced, her vision blurred with unshed tears. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever looked at her like this, as if she mattered. "Why me?" she whispered. He shrugged lightly, but his eyes held no doubt. "Because I see it. And maybe one day you will too." Silence stretched again, but it was no longer heavy. For the first time in her life, silence felt safe. When she finally turned to leave, her steps felt unsteady, as if the ground itself had shifted. She clutched her chest, her heart beating too fast. His words rang louder than the cruel laughter she had known all her life. That night, she stood before the small mirror in her chamber. For years, she had avoided her reflection, unable to face the failure everyone saw. But tonight, she forced herself to look. Her face stared back, soft features, unscarred skin, eyes that always hid behind lowered lids. She had always believed this was proof of her weakness. Yet for the first time, she looked longer. Her eyes weren't weak, they were alive. She touched her reflection, whispering the word again. "Beautiful." It felt strange, almost forbidden. But it also felt powerful. Outside, the night wind carried the same cruel voices she had always heard. But inside, something was changing. Slowly, painfully, but surely, the human's compliment had not just surprised her. It had cracked the foundation of her world, and she realized with a trembling smile she was terrified, but also curious. What if he was right? The academy buzzed with its usual rhythm-clashing weapons, echoing drills, and the endless roar of warriors proving their worth. But for her, everything felt different. The voices of mockery still circled her, but they no longer cut as deeply as before. A single memory, a single voice, kept standing against them. You are stronger than you think. More beautiful than you realize. She carried those words like a hidden flame. No one saw it, but it burned quietly inside her chest. In training, she still stumbled. Her movements were slower, her strikes less powerful. Warriors smirked as they passed. Yet this time when she fell, she rose again, not because she believed she was strong, but because she wanted to test if maybe, just maybe, he was right. At night, in her small chamber, she began to practice in secret. Simple stances at first. Breathing exercises. She repeated every strike until her arms ached, until sweat dripped down her back. She whispered his words like a mantra, steadying her heart when doubt crept in. Stronger than you think. Her reflection in the mirror began to change. Not in appearance, her body was the same, her face still soft, her frame still smaller than the others. But her eyes no longer hid. They began to look back with fire. Days turned into weeks, and though she did not speak much, the change was noticed. Some whispered that she moved differently now, her steps steadier. Others thought it strange that she no longer flinched at insults. Even the trainers, though they never praised her, watched her a little longer. She never told them the truth, that it was the human's words echoing in her soul. He, too, noticed. Sometimes their eyes met across the training yard. He didn't always speak. Sometimes he only nodded, a small gesture, but it filled her with a strength greater than shouts of approval ever could. One evening, when the stars burned low over the academy, she found herself climbing the ridge outside the colony. She had never gone there before. Too many eyes, too much risk of being seen as weak if she wandered alone. But tonight, something called her higher. At the top, she looked at the sky. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, without the weight of others' judgment pressing down. The silence of the night wrapped around her, but it did not feel lonely. It felt alive. She remembered the human's voice, steady and calm. They want you to believe you are small. But you are not. Her hands curled into fists. She whispered to herself, I am not small. The words shook her. She had never said them before. Never dared. But now, saying them out loud felt like breaking a chain. The next day, during drills, her peers mocked her again. Step aside, weak one. You'll trip over your own feet. But instead of lowering her gaze, she looked at them directly. She did not speak, but her eyes did. For the first time they flinched. That single moment was small. But it was a victory. She returned to her chamber that night with a quiet smile. No one celebrated her. No one noticed her progress. But inside, she celebrated herself. For years she had lived as if she were invisible. Now she realized visibility did not come from others. It began from within. And though she still trembled with doubt, though her body still ached with weakness, she felt something growing. It was slow, quiet, almost hidden. But it was real. It was transformation. Silent, unstoppable. The day began like any other, sunlight cutting across the jagged cliffs, warriors sharpening their blades, and the endless noise of drills echoing through the academy. But by afternoon, everything changed. A deep rumble shook the ground, low at first, then rising into a roar that sent a shiver through the colony. The sound came from the valley beyond the gates. Trainers shouted, alarms rang, and warriors rushed to form ranks. She stood frozen as the ground quivered beneath her feet. Then the cry pierced the air, sharp, violent, monstrous. It wasn't training. It wasn't drills. It was real. The beast had come. Everyone knew stories of the fire-scaled predator that prowled the outer ridges, a nightmare that even trained warriors feared. No one expected it to break through the defenses, but now its shadow rose against the horizon, massive, snarling. Wings spread wide. The academy erupted into chaos. Younglings screamed. Instructors shouted orders. Warriors armed themselves, but the beast moved faster than their formation. It struck the training ground with a thunderous crash, claws raking across the earth. And in the middle of the chaos, she found herself cornered with a group of frightened children. Their eyes clung to her, wide with terror. Her breath caught. Her chest burned. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to hide, to do what she had always done, disappear. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't trained enough. She wasn't worthy. But then, like a spark in the darkness, she heard it. His voice. Not in the air, but in her memory. You are stronger than you think. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to step forward. The children huddled behind her, clutching each other. The beast turned, its eyes glowing like molten fire, its growl shaking her bones. She raised her arms, no weapon in her hands, only her body as a shield. Her heart hammered so loud it drowned the screams around her. She whispered to herself, I am not small. The beast lunged. Her first instinct was to close her eyes, but she didn't. She moved not perfectly, not powerfully, but with everything she had. She grabbed a fallen spear, planted her feet, and let out a cry that surprised even her. The strike wasn't strong enough to wound the creature, but it slowed it for a breath, enough to make the children scatter behind the rocks. Enough to buy time. Enough to show that she did not run. Pain shot through her arms as the beast slammed against her defense. She stumbled, fell, her body screaming in protest. But she rose again. Blood trickled down her palms, dust covered her face, yet she refused to retreat. For the first time in her life she wasn't hiding. The warriors finally noticed her stand. Shock flickered across their faces. This weak girl, the one they called worthless, was facing the beast head-on, and then another figure leapt into the fight. The human. He landed beside her, a weapon in his grip, his stance low and steady. He gave her the smallest nod, as if to say, I knew you could. Together, they faced the monster. He struck with precision, distracting the beast. She followed, not perfectly, not powerfully, but with courage that burned brighter than her fear. Every strike she made echoed louder than the cruel voices she had carried all her life. The fight was chaos roars. Steel, fire, dust, but in that chaos, she felt something new. Her body ached, her breath tore at her chest, but she realized she wasn't weak. Not anymore. The beast roared one final time before retreating into the valley, wounded and furious. The ground grew silent, save for the heavy breaths of those who had stood against it. She collapsed to her knees, exhausted, trembling, but alive. Behind her, the children peeked out, eyes wide with awe. Around her, warriors stared not with mockery this time, but with something closer to respect. And beside her, the human placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. You see? He said softly. Stronger than you think. Tears blurred her vision, but this time, they weren't from shame. This was the moment she realized the fire inside her had survived the trial. And it was only beginning to grow. The training grounds were silent after the beast fled. Dust still hung in the air, and the smell of scorched stone clung to the wind. Warriors stood in shock, whispering among themselves. They had seen the impossible. The weak one had stood against the predator. She knelt on the ground, her body trembling, lungs burning for air. Her hands were raw from gripping the spear, her knees bruised from the fall. Yet, in her chest, her heart beat with a strength she had never known before. And beside her, he stood the human. He was not large. His frame was smaller than most warriors. Yet, the way he held himself made it seem as if the ground itself gave him strength. His eyes swept over the stunned crowd, then softened as they fell on her. "You stood," he said simply. The words were quiet, almost lost in the chaos, but they reached her more powerfully than any roar. She tried to answer, but her throat tightened and only silence came. The warriors began to murmur louder now. Some looked at her with disbelief, others with a flicker of respect. But not all. A few sneered, unwilling to let go of their old judgment. "She just got lucky," one muttered. She would have died without him. Her chest tightened again, the old wounds threatening to return. But before the whispers could crush her, the human turned sharply toward them. "Luck?" His voice carried, calm yet unshakable. "Luck doesn't make someone stand when everyone else is running. Luck doesn't put their body between children and death. That isn't luck. That is courage." The words silenced the field. No one argued. She stared at him, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Courage. No one had ever used that word for her. The trainers finally stepped forward, gathering the children, checking for injuries. The chaos began to settle. Yet the human stayed beside her, offering his hand. She hesitated. For years, she had learned not to take hands, not to trust them. They only pulled her down. But his hand was steady, open, waiting without pressure. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. He pulled her up, firm but gentle. The crowd watched. For the first time, she didn't care. As they walked away from the training ground, she spoke, her voice soft. "Why did you come back?" "You could have left me." He looked at her, and there was no hesitation in his answer. "Because you reminded me why I'm here." She frowned slightly. "Why are you here?" The human looked out toward the horizon where the beast had vanished. "To prove something. Not to them. Not even to myself. But to those who are told they don't belong. I know what that feels like. And when I saw you, I knew you didn't need saving. You needed someone to stand with you." Her breath caught. She had never heard words like these. Not from her people. Not from anyone. As they reached the ridge outside the academy, the wind carried the sound of distant drum signals that the colony was safe again. She stood beside him, the stars slowly appearing above. For a long time they said nothing. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was alive. She thought back to the girl she had been only weeks ago, the one who hid from mirrors, who lowered her gaze, who believed she was nothing. Now standing beside him, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't the same. "You believe in me," she whispered. He turned to her, his expression steady, his eyes calm. "I don't just believe in you. I see you. And one day, they will too." Her heart raced, but this time, not from fear. From possibility. From hope. The night wrapped around them, but for her, it was no longer darkness. It was the beginning of light. The colony had changed after the attack. The beast was gone, but its shadow lingered. Warriors spoke of the battle in hushed voices, retelling every moment as if they still couldn't believe what they had seen. At the center of every story was her, the girl once mocked as weak, useless, not breeding material, now stood in their whispers with a new name: courageous, brave, different. She walked through the academy grounds with the same quiet steps as before, but something had shifted. Where once eyes only looked at her with scorn, now they lingered with confusion, even reluctant respect. Some still muttered, unwilling to accept the change, but others fell silent when she passed. She did not raise her head proudly. She did not shout or boast. But deep inside, something burned steady, a fire no insult could extinguish anymore, and she knew exactly how it had begun. Human. He had not spoken of the battle since that day. He didn't need to. He still trained, still walked the grounds, still carried himself with calm defiance. But now, when their eyes met, there was something unspoken between them. An understanding. A bond forged in fire. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the cliffs in gold and crimson, she climbed the ridge again. This time, she wasn't running away from whispers. She wasn't hiding. She climbed because she wanted to. Because the stars called her. At the top, she found him waiting. "You knew I would come?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. Yes. For a while, they stood side by side, watching the stars appear. The silence was no longer heavy, no longer painful. It was full of possibility. Finally she spoke. "My whole life I believed I was nothing. They told me I was not enough. And I believed them. But you..." Her voice trembled. "You saw something different." He turned, his gaze steady. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I only reminded you it was there." Her chest tightened, tears glistening in her eyes. Not of sadness. Not of shame. But of release. "Do you know what they call me now?" she whispered, a small smile touching her lips. "Courageous, brave. And what do you call yourself?" he asked. She looked at the horizon, the wind lifting her hair, the fire of the setting sun catching in her eyes. For the first time, her answer was clear. Alive, the word hung in the air, powerful and true. She realized then that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would still be whispers. There would still be doubts. But now she had something stronger than their voices, her own. She turned to the human, her heart steady. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. Just keep proving them wrong. Keep proving yourself right." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, soft but free. She hadn't laughed in years. Not like this. Together, they stood as the first stars brightened above. Two figures, one alien, one human, bound not by strength of body, but by strength of spirit. For her, it was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of one, and as the galaxy stretched wide before her, she finally believed that maybe, just maybe, she was more than enough.